Okay, so we've covered several details in regards to how to get customer presentations that look how you want. And you're probably wondering why we haven't addressed the fact that our drawings are brown and blue and they look pretty bad. So in this video, we're going to talk about how we can edit our layers to change the colors. And in this video, I'm going to be shooting for just a very simple black and white drawing. That way it's very minimalist and the customer isn't overwhelmed by the amount of things going on the page. So let's go back to our plan view. I'm going to go up to layers. And I'm actually going to create a copy of the shop layer. Now this is up to you if you want to edit it directly or make a copy, but for this video I'm going to be making a copy and I'm going to call it customer drawings. And so layers, you can ultimately set up layers depending on the task that you're doing, because there'll be sometimes when you want to see all the lines and you want to focus on certain details. And so as you get deeper and deeper into this, you might have 3 or 4 layers that you switch through depending on what kind of task you're working on in the job. So here I'm going to focus on customer drawings. So we click OK, and then let's switch to that layer. Now obviously I still look exactly the same because we haven't done anything. So like I mentioned, I want to make everything just very simply black, gray, or white. So I'm going to go up to edit, and with customer drawings highlighted, I'm going to click edit again. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the walls to black. So you just click on that little color tile and then change it to what you need. And then I also like to make my lines just a little bit thicker on the walls. Now this is up to you. It's kind of personal preference, but I also like showing just several different aspects of this just to give you some ideas. So now if I click that and we want to look at it, nothing changes right when I get out of the screen. So you have to refresh the screen in order to see that. So just toggle onto elevation and right back to plan. There we go. So our walls are updated. Let's keep working on these cabinets. So I'm just going to work my way through, and I like to think of it as all of the important stuff I'm going to make black, and all of kind of the secondary things, the less important things, I'm going to make a dark gray. And again, that's just opinion, but this just gives you an idea of something to start with. So I'm going to make my countertops and molding dark gray because they're not really the primary thing I'm providing. Exposed parts, I'm going to make black. Internal parts, black. Frame, black. Doors and drawers, I'm going to make the drawer box gray. Toe black. Objects gray. Hardware gray. And again, this is just personal decisions. I'm just setting up a template here to get started. And even if they're turned off, I would still go ahead and change the colors. That way if somebody happens to turn it on, it's not screaming green or yellow. Okay, so let's see how we did. Okay, very nice. Now, one thing I do want to note. Right now I'm seeing all the internal parts and the details of the cabinets. At this point, you need to make a decision if you want to show all the details, like all the part, or if you want to do simple box outlines. So if I want to do that, I'm going to go to Advanced and do Assembly Outlines Only. Now if I just refresh my screen, now we see, now they turn this brown color again, because what happens with, when I activated that, it unlocked these settings here that were currently not available. So let me make these all black. Okay, and let's refresh again. Okay, so this is the simple outlines view, and I should maybe just hide the molding because that's kind of cluttering up our view a bit, but yeah, let me go ahead and do that actually. I'm just going to turn off molding for a little bit. Okay, so here you see the simple outlines. So some people really like this because, it's less for the customer to look at. They're really not seeing all those extra lines. So again, that's personal preference. That's how you do it, is you go to Advanced and check this simple outlines or Assembly Outlines Only. So I'm going to uncheck it for this video. Back to seeing everything, and then I'm also just going to go ahead and turn I'm going to leave my molding off for now as well. Okay, now I want to explain another important thing with live drawings. So let me send this to live drawing, and let me actually just clear my sheet out. Okay, so I'm going to send it to live drawing, and then I'm going to send another one to live drawing as well. So now I have 2 to pick from. So I want to show you a very important thing with live drawings, because what you see on the screen is not what you're going to get when you print it. So what I mean by that is currently, we can see the hardware, we can see the toe parts, the partitions, everything. Notice what happens when I print this. If I go to the print icon in the top left, Microsoft Print to PDF, and just put it on landscape. You might have to change your page size if you're using a bigger piece of paper, but I'm going to leave mine on 8.5 by 11. And I'm just going to save this as test 1. And we'll pull this over. Okay, now notice how this looks very little like what our drawings tab does. it's hiding all of the internal parts. In other words, when you hit the print button, it like renders as if the camera is looking down on the plan view, and it doesn't see past, and it's unable to see through parts or past parts. So that may be a good thing. You may like that. In fact, I think it looks better because it doesn't go through the cabinet. Now, if you don't want that to happen, you can go to render. Now, if we leave it on render, let me just make another one. Test 2. And we'll open that. Okay, so this one you can see all the way through. I'm actually not totally sure if there's a way to put it on render by default, but I know you can. If you're very insistent on seeing that, you can right click and check the render button. I'd say there's probably a preference, but honestly, I prefer the way it comes out by default. I like when it only shows that perspective view and doesn't show what's below it. Just wanted to explain that because I know some people are like, why am I not seeing what's on the screen? And I agree it is a little tricky. I don't know why it doesn't show exactly what it's going to print here, but I did want to explain that up front. Okay, now we set up our plan view, and that's just a tiny percentage of what we need to do with layers, because when I go to elevations and go to wire mode, everything's brown again. So I'm not going to go through every view because there are a lot of different layers. So like, for example, if I click inside a cabinet, I have the in view, the plan view, the face view, all of these things. For the sake of this video, I'm going to do the elevation and the 3D view because I think those are the primary things that you're going to be using. So I'm going to just move a little bit faster through here this time. I'm going to edit the layers. I'm going to do the exact same thing with my walls, just make them all black, and I'm going to make them just that little bit thicker just to make them stand out from the rest of the lines. And then we're doing dark gray on the molding and the countertop. I can highlight my color and hit enter to save a little time. Exposed parts black, drawer box gray, toe parts black. So again, just working my way through here. We're going to get to shop annotations in one of the next videos. For now, we're totally focused on color. Okay, so even the ones that have the pencil off, I'm going to go ahead and change so that if somebody turns it on, it's good to go. Okay, and again, we just refresh our screen to see that. Looking much cleaner. And let's do 3D as well. So I'm going to put it on wire mode. And we got a lot of lines happening here, but I'll just go to customer drawings and do the same things here. And I would try to be consistent. Like I said, I think over time you'll copy layers and make specific things for certain tasks that you're doing. But try to be consistent as you go through different screens while you're on the same layer. These are supposed to be gray. as I'm explaining consistency, I'm making them different than that. Okay, we're just going to keep working our way through here. So as you can see, it takes a little time, but if you just spend a little time going through each of your reviews, and it's not terrible. Now let me clean off all my drawings and let me just make a sample drawing for you. We're going to go to live drawing from the plan view. We're going to go to elevation to live drawing, and then 3D to live drawing. All right, now we pull these out. I'm going to go to properties and scale, and I'm going to make 3/8 my default. Now, as I pull it out, it'll be more the size that I want. Much nicer. Elevation on the next page, and 3D on the next page. Okay, so let's check out what this looks like. So we go to the print icon, put it on landscape, and let's take a peek. Test 3. Okay, so notice we're getting that perspective view, which I think looks nice. Same thing with elevation. We're unable to see through the cabinets. Now that causes a problem with adjustable shelves because it'd be really nice to see that. And when we get into shop annotations in the next video, we will be able to mark those. But overall, this is looking a whole lot better than those brown and blue lines, right? Now this is still trying to show everything. Now for a 3D drawing, I'm not a fan of that. So oftentimes what I'll do, when I'm doing a 3D, I will do 2 drawing. Okay, so why did this decide to show everything inside when all of these did the perspective view? And arguably, this is the one view that we want, only show what we can see. So if I minimize this, and if I go back to 3D, and if I right click and go to properties and put it on hidden line instead of bitmap. Bitmap is like another word for image or that type of thing. Hidden line is more of CAD lines. Now I'm going to do to live drawing. And I'll delete this and pull the latest one out. And let's give it another whirl. Much more in line with what we would expect. So why did this view decide to show all the internal parts? Because arguably this is the one view that should be in perspective mode, like these two were. So let's look at how we can change that. So I'm going to clear this off, just delete this, and I'm also going to delete my scene so I don't get confused. And there's a little setting if you go into properties from the 3D tab. And this is a different properties than any of the other tabs, so make sure you're in 3D tab and then right click and go to properties. And it's currently on bitmap, which is more of like an image capture. And we want to put it on hidden line, which kind of becomes more like CAD lines. And I'm going to set that as my system defaults. And I click OK. And now when I do, I'm going to go ahead and do to live drawing. But most times for myself, when I do 3Ds, I like to drawing better. I think the to live drawing it can be a little quirky. Sometimes things don't look like where they're supposed to be on the paper. So let's do a to live drawing first. And I'll just pull that out. So nothing looks different yet here, but let me go ahead and print it. Test 4. So you can see it is doing the perspective view, but exactly what I was talking about earlier, the reason I don't like live drawings for 3Ds seems like it's a little bit unpredictable in the placement, because if you look at my drawings tab, it's supposed to be exactly centered, but it's supposed to be somewhat centered, whereas here, it's off the page. And it doesn't always act that way, but like I said, it can be a little bit quirky. So if I'm doing 3Ds, I most times do the regular to drawing. So zoom in, get a nice position on your shot, right click, and this is one time when I do regular to drawing. And we like this because now we get an instant preview of what it's going to look like. And if we go to drawings tab and pull this guy out, there we go. And these are actually CAD lines, which is pretty cool because that means you can actually go to CAD and you can do some editing. So if there's some things here you don't like if you don't want to see this knob, just highlight it and hit the delete key. If there's some weird lines going on that you feel like is confusing the customer, you can clean it up a bit, which I think is pretty useful. And I also like that it's a little bit more predictable for the designer to know how it's going to print. So summary, definitely use live drawings everywhere except for 3D views. I would use to drawing, and I would recommend putting it on hidden line and setting that as your system defaults. Now, I am going to cover 3D photorealistic rendering in another section, and that will change some of the ways that we go about things. So if you're planning on doing photorealistic rendering, we're going to cover that in its own section. But for now, I just want to do simple, nice perspective line drawings, and that is the best way to capture it. Just a regular to drawing with hidden line enabled. So that is how I recommend setting up a very simple layer scene to get the colors how I want to. Obviously, you can tweak this to your own preferences to make it how you think your customers want to see it. So in the next couple videos, we're going to be talking about dimensioning and annotations, which annotations is a weird word, but you'll see what it means when we get there. In this video, we're going to talk about auto dimensions. And in my opinion, this is kind of what separates a really poor looking drawing and a really nice looking drawing. And my strategy behind this is keep the auto dimensions to a minimum and manually dimension the things that we need. And in order to do that, I'm going to go into the settings where we control what gets automatically dimensioned, and I'm going to just erase everything and rebuild it from scratch so you know exactly where things are coming from. Because sometimes we just think, we see things working by default and we don't think there's a lot of customized. And we don't realize that there's actually a whole lot of customization into this. So I'm going to go to my layers. I'm going to edit in customer drawings. And I'm going to scroll down. And the words that are in bold here, you can actually double click on. There's more options. So I'm going to go into dimensions. And we're going to do some editing to what is available here. Now we're going to talk about dimension styles in the next video, and that's like font and size and what type of arrows and stuff. For now, I'm only focused on what is actually getting dimensioned. So we're going to see some things like assembly height, wall height, and everything in here is creating a line. So, why is there two lines here on the left? Well, if I look at wall height, it's set to be on the left and it's creating a dimension at the end of every wall. And assembly heights is also on the left, and it's doing wall ends, assembly top, and assembly bottom, and then upper cabinet assembly top and bottoms. So you can see everywhere it's splitting a dimension is because of what's checked in here. Alright, like I said, I'm going to totally delete all of these, and we're going to rebuild from scratch because I just like learning that way. Okay, let's see how that looks. Brilliant. Absolutely no dimensions. So let's start by putting an obvious one on. I want the wall width and the wall height, and I think I'll do the wall width at the bottom. So let's go back into dimensions and double click dimensions, and let's add our first dimension. And probably a good idea to go ahead and give this a name so we don't get confused later on. Call this wall.width. Apparently I can't do dots, so it's just going to be wall width. And I'm going to edit this. And where do I want this to be, first of all? I want it to be on the bottom. And what do I want to allow to cause a break in my line? Well, certainly not sink centers, certainly not appliance centers, and not the cabinets. All I want is wall ends. And if you do forced dimension lines, it means it's always going to show up, even if it can't find any wall ends. I'm going to leave that unchecked unless we have problems with it showing. So if you ever see a dimension not showing and you know it's in your list, just come check this forced dimension line. All right, so one by one, let's just come check and see what we're doing. Oh, why is it not here? Let's go down to dimensions. Let's go to wall width. And you know what? I'm going to force the dimension line because there's never a time when I don't want wall ends to be on this drawing. Now, I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but I do want to move that down just a little bit farther because it's kind of blending in with my number 4 there. So in order to do that, I'm going to double click into dimensions, and this horizontal line offset, I'm going to make 10 because that's what the vertical is. So what this means is the first line is going to be at 10 and every line after that is 5 apart. Okay, now let me put it in fractions. That will make things look a little nicer as well. Now let's put wall length on the left. And we'll go down to dimensions, create a new one called wall height. Edit that. It's going to be on the left, that's perfect. And uncheck everything except wall ends, and let's force that dimension because we always want it. What do we want next? I want to put the base cabinet on the bottom line. So let's make that happen. Dimensions, new, cabinet, base width. It really doesn't matter what you name it, just make it something that you're going to know what you intended it to be. And bottom, I'm going to include wall ends, and I'm going to include assembly ends. And if it doesn't say base, but because this is specified as upper, I know that this is talking about base. And then we definitely want to take off sink and appliance. Okay. There we go. That created dimensions between every base cabinet. Perfect. Now, I would rather see the wall length on the bottom. So how do we switch that? Let's go back into edit. And let's move our walls to the bottom. So whatever you have above is going to be higher priority and closer to the wall. Not sure how to describe that, but closer to the wall. And I want my wall dimensions on the outside. That's perfect. Now you can get, as you can see, there's a lot of options in those dimensions. Like I could do, oh, sink centers would be nice. Oh, appliance centers, might be nice for the plumbers and all that. And that's true, but I think what you'll find is it can cause a lot of confusion on a print. So I like to keep my auto dimensions very simple. And if I need to manually add a dimension, well, we know that's certainly not hard. All I gotta do is go to CAD dimensions and, say I want the sink center, I would just grab that and then I could move it up there, which I got a crooked line, but you get the idea. It's easy enough to add dimensions. The few times when it's not enough, it's much better than getting the dimensions overcrowded, in my opinion. Okay, well, let's keep going. So let's add base height and upper height over here on the left. And I want to remember we want wall heights on the outside, farthest away from the wall. Okay, so let's do cabinet heights. And let's move that up, edit it. And this is actually pretty close to what I want. Yeah, because I need the base top and bottom, and I need the upper top and bottom. And there's some pretty neat things in here, such as toe height and countertop and splash. And again, all really nice information, and you can experiment with it, but I think you'll find it gets a little too busy. So let's just keep it right like this for now. There we go. That's looking good. And let's put the upper width across the top. Cabinet, upper widths, and edit. Top. So I want wall ends and upper assembly ends. We don't need the centers. We don't need the windows, and we don't need the doors. Now, this is debatable. Let's see how it looks without. There we go. So it's showing 40 inches between the window. Now, just by checking windows, if I go back to cabinet upper width and go to window ends, that might be okay in some situations, but again, I myself would rather put a manual dimension so I know exactly what I'm talking about. Again, kind of personal preference, but I'm just telling you my opinion on some of these things. So I'm going to take window ends off of mine. And that's looking pretty nice. Now, we can still make some changes to this. Like if I decided, well, why would I have wall length over here? Why don't I move my wall length over to the right? Well, that's perfectly fine. We can do that. So we go to dimensions, wall height, and let's move it to the right so it has its own designated space. Okay, so you get the idea. Every line you do has the potential to create a new line. And so use all four sides as much as possible and keep your auto dimensioning to a minimum. So what do I talk about? What do I mean when I say a drawing can get too busy? Let me give you an example. If I put an upper cabinet here, and this happens on a fridge cabinet or whatever, but if you have a really long wall and you start getting several of these situations where kind of force a cabinet in here, put one here, you kind of start getting some offset things with fillers and refrigerator cabinets and microwave cabinets, and this starts becoming, I just don't like it. So just a random little tip when you're doing drawings, if you ever want something to be ignored from the auto dimension, not exactly a built-in option, but if we change the angle to 0.001, it removes it from the auto dimension. So if you ever have some cabinets that are just kind of being a little troublesome, just change the angle on them and then manually dimension what you need. When we get to the UCS section, I'm also going to show you how to write a UCS that you can just click on this and say remove dimension. So you don't have to remember that weird little tip. But that is very helpful if you're someone who cares about nice, clean drawings. So let's get these little guys out of here. And there we go. I could go and add more lines, but I think you get the idea. Whether you're on the plan view, inside a cabinet, or on the elevation view, keep your dimensions simple, organize them how you think is the most clear. Okay, now that we've decided what should actually be allowed to create dimensions, let's see how we can customize this. So I'm going to go back into my layers and go back to that same dimensions tab that we were just in. And notice how this is set on layout right now. I'm going to go to a slightly different area. Instead of going to layers, I'm going to go to the other side and go to dimension styles. And because I know that I'm using layout, this is the one I would edit. Now, for myself, I would rather copy this just so I can get back to the system default. So let's make a copy and let's call it wall elevations, and that'll be fine. And we'll edit this. And let's take a look at some of the things that we can do. And first of all, there's some different arrows. So you can do the closed arrows. Let me see if I can make them a little bigger, just for the sake of this. Maybe I can make my window bigger. No, I can't. Okay, you get the idea. You can see that the closed arrow is filled in, the open just has the marks. Now, there's also dot, closed or open. And there's another circle, which is very similar to a dot. One of my favorites is the architectural tick. I think this looks really nice, but you can play with what's available here. I'm going to do architectural tick for this example, and I'm just going to put it on 3 as a starting point. And we can play with some of the options here. You see how that just makes the line extend past, which I do kind of like that, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to make it extend past, I'm not going to do that. Just coming out away from the wall. I'm not going to do the extension. And then tail offset is how close it gets to the wall. So if you put it to 0, it butts all the way into the wall, and this brings it away. So I'm going to actually pull it away just a little bit. And let's do architectural ticks on the left and right. Okay, there we go. Now for the text, we have some options. We can do all horizontal, or we can do aligned. So you can see that example like in the case of this little radius. So I'm gonna do horizontal. I like seeing all the things from this view. And then we can do centered or above or below. I like centered. And we have offset, which has to do with how far it gets away from, you can see a good example here on the radius section. So offset has to do with how far it gets away from the line. You can see an example down there by the radius and here by the 30. So offset you're probably not going to need, but you can see an example down here by the radius. If I put something big in there, it just brings it farther away from the angle. So I'm going to leave mine at 0. Clearance can be nice, it just how much room is left before the numbers. If it's at 0, it does get a little bit tight. I might just kind of split the difference and go 1/2 inch. You can put a frame around it, which can be nice for some visibility. I like mine without. And then you can change the font. I used back when I did drawings was Technical. I think it looks good on a more of an architectural style. But if you change it here, change it on all of your fonts. I would try to be consistent with your font. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to go back to Arial, and it's not going to be bowed. And I'm just going to match my 2 might be about right. Let's go 2 1/4. And if it can't fit, we can hide the arrow and the text. And I'm going to check this because I just don't like seeing overlaps. I think it looks messy. So I'm going to leave mine like that. And that did nothing, right? Even when we refresh it. Why not? Well, all I really did was copy the layout section. I never really applied it anywhere. So let's go back into our layers and go to dimensions. And instead of layout, I want to do wall elevations. And so now I got my little tick marks, which looks like I got a little bit aggressive with the tick mark. So let's go edit that. Even after it's applied, we can still edit it. Let's bring these guys down to maybe 1.5 inches. There we go. That's looking pretty nice. And actually, I'm going to bring that line offset just a little bit more because I know that I have it set to 10 away. Remember that first line setting back in the dimension style? Or not the dimension style, in the dimensions tab. I know this is at 10 and my line is actually going 1 inch past. I don't necessarily have to bring it all the way to 1 inch, but I do want to get a little closer because I think it looks a little tight, especially if there would happen to be a number right there. So that does get just a little bit tight there, especially if there would happen to be a number there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that little offset there just a little bit bigger so my line starts more like about down here. I'm going to do half the distance of 10. So this is not going to be in my layers. It's actually going to be in my dimension styles. Edit the wall elevations. And on the tail offset, I'm going to do 5. So now that pulled that down a little farther. And I think that looks pretty nice. A lot of personal preference being shared right here, but again, like all my other videos, the go is to reconstruct everything from scratch so you know that, oh, hey, I can change that. I didn't realize I could change that. So hopefully that's happening. Hopefully there's some light bulbs going off. Now, what I would recommend is create a new dimension style for your plans, have one for your elevations, and then if you do a lot of like interior sections, you might even need to create a dimension style for your inside. I find that's the easiest way to control my fonts and just make sure I'm showing exactly what I need to. Now that we have a better understanding where the dimensions are coming from and we have everything styled how we want it, before we get ready to send this to our drawings for real, let's make a few notes here to polish this thing up. So like I said, I prefer the simplified auto dimensions. If you want to add more, you're welcome to, but I find it's very quick and easy to just polish this up. So in this video, I'm going to show you just an example of some of the dimensions that I might want to add. So for example, I can't tell how big the window is or how close it gets to my cabinet. And again, this is a little test job because actually this is overlapping my splash, which is a horrible example, but again, demonstrations. So I'm going to go to dimensions, and because I created a wall elevation style, I might as well use that same style. That way I don't have to worry about formatting. And so I'll just click this and put my 7.5 there. And if for whatever reason I wanted to also see above the window, I could do that. And what else might be useful? I already have the 19.5. I could put the splash height, but I think I would rather do a text leader for that. So maybe just put a little 4-inch splash. Now my defaults are way too big. Remember how to set defaults. We don't want this coming in as, let's figure out what we want it to be. So let's go 1.5 inches, 2 might be okay. Now, remember how we set defaults. I click text leader, make it 2 and 3, and then go right back to select. Now that's going to help me when I come to finish up. So a couple other notes I might jot down is maybe false front. Maybe we want to put a Susan here. Let's go to another wall. I already got the auto dimensions working there. Not really missing anything. Let's go to over the appliance. Ooh, I know one thing that we could do. The sink center. This will be helpful for the plumber. Now, I could do a dimension, but there's not really a good line to snap to. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just highlight the sink and see that it's 80 inches from the right. And I'll just put a text leader or just a piece of text. Sink 80 inches. And there's all kinds of ways you can do this. Some people might prefer the dimensions. You can do a lot of different things. But the key is that you get information on the drawings in a clean and concise way. Go to plan view, and maybe we want to put a dimension on the island, which I never really finished building my island. But I'm going to go to CAD, and I'll just add a dimension from here, 50.5, and then we'll just snap one onto here. Perfect. And there's not really anything saying the depth of the island, so maybe I'll just go ahead and put a dimension there. Just pull it all the way out to here. And it's kind of hard to tell how deep this pantry is, so maybe I'll put one there. So you kind of see what I'm after here. I'm just kind of scanning through the elevations, seeing what might be useful for the customer or for the contractor who's going to be installing it. Okay, so we've been creating all black and white, very simplified drawings. What if you have some really fancy textures, or maybe you bought my wood textures off of the store, but what if you want to show texture mode? We've been looking at, if I go to render mode, we're in wire mode. There's also fill mode and texture mode. And I think this certainly has a place, especially for a customer. I think they have an architect or a more commercial type of environment. I think they'll prefer the wireframe, and there's places for both. There's pros and cons. But just your everyday residential customer might actually prefer seeing the textured. I think they'll just be able to understand better what they're looking at. So how do we control that? We are looking at a live view, but it does not change. So it's very important that you have it in the view that you want before you send the drawings. Everything else will update. If you add a cabinet, if you change the dimension, if you make the wall longer, all that stuff updates because it's a live drawing, but the render mode will not update. So if you went through and sent everything to drawing in wire mode and all of a sudden you want it in texture mode, you will have to resend all of your drawings. So I'm going to right click and do to live drawing. And let's just kind of put these side by side. Let's make that guy a little smaller. Okay, let's print this and take a look how the PDF looks. Test 5. Okay, we still have our plan view. And here you can see, do you prefer the clean line drawings or do you prefer the preview of the finished color with the right texture? It's up to you. Now you know how to do either option. So I'm sure there's some of you who are asking the question, why is this so much work? I just want to create customer drawings. Why can't this just work out of the box? And technically it can. You just have to make some compromises on what you want. I think there's a ton of value in deconstructing what Cabinet Vision has in here, and you understand what a template is made of. Why is the auto dimension working this way? How does the color change? It's important that we go through what we just did in this section. Now, there is good news. It certainly doesn't mean that you're going to do this every time you make a drawing. Yes, the first job that you try to do is going to be very frustrating. You're going to spend a lot of time getting this set up. But once you get your system in place and you get all your templates working, you get all your dimension styles and your fonts and your colors, this becomes a very quick and easy way. You draw the job in Cabinet Vision, you go to drawings. Now, depending on the level of detail, there's certainly still going to be some time spent, making notes and little markups and everything that the architect or the person who's receiving the prints is going to require. But Cabinet Vision is very good at doing templates, and if you put the right systems in place, this can be a very streamlined process. So yes, it feels like a lot of work up front, but unfortunately that is the cost of a very flexible and very powerful software.